back, everyone. This is The Nerdy Truth, and I'm your host, Dr. JJ Walcott. Our focus is on harnessing citizen innovation to build solutions for the future of our country. Today, we're going to be talking with Neila Wilson, both a friend and colleague of mine. I met her a while back as we were working on the Women's March, and she is just one of those inspirational leaders, clear-headed, wise, and always is seeing the perspective of someone else. Today, we're going to be focused on the Black Lives Matter movement and Juneteenth and all the things that are happening and the discussions that are happening in our country. My goal is to ask hard questions. So without further ado, let's bring in our guest.
Okay. Hello.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I am well. I am loving the color.
Oh, this color or this color? Or...
All of it.
I haven't seen you in forever. How are you doing?
Oh my goodness. We're all trying to keep up, keep sane, and do what we can.
Right.
Each of us in our own way. So I'm no different. But I think for everyone, it's taking a toll. It's just which particular struggle are each of us facing right now?
Right.
Certainly some more than others. Yes, exactly. I don't know if anybody's coming through this unscathed at all, right? There's life lessons and national lessons and global lessons that are happening, certainly healthcare lessons. So it's a bit of a new world. I think the world is shaken up a bit. So that's why I wanted to talk to you somewhat, because I'd love to hear how things are going. I've been following on Facebook, and as always, you have clear recommendations. They're informed. You're thinking, you're putting yourself in the shoes of others, and that's not something all of us can do easily. I feel like
I've been off Facebook for a while, and so I got brought back into it, and so the energy there, the emotion, it's like trying to balance, not taking in too much of it, but trying to process what you're seeing and balance so that you keep your sanity,
Absolutely. And I think, what's hard right now is it's just everything is amplified. Right. At least before, we were forced into an office with some regularity. We were forced to bring our emotions down for a while. And now when we're in seclusion, they just ramp up with no check. And so anything that's kind of bothersome is going to hit people a little bit harder. But that said, there's a lot happening that should be amplified.
Absolutely.
It's a balance. Where is that line? But I'm very curious, truly, to hear your perspective, because I know you're 2 feet into all of it, and what you're seeing. It's interesting to watch what's around the country. Personally, having just gotten back and gotten to meet with people from every state and every walk of life. And then I think it's interesting too to see what's happening globally. There's a lot of response there too. It's not just about our country.
Absolutely. I think that has been the most heartening. It has really made me feel like this is a different time that we're in. It's twofold, right? Because one, it's solidarity and unification of a world culture, a world people of humanity. But it's also the fact that this issue is happening around the world. There are a lot of communities impacted by the same thing that is happening here, maybe in different ways to different levels. But, France, they've had similar stories, and UK, they've had similar stories. So that has also helped to galvanize this movement that started in Sanford, Florida, 5 years ago, has now galvanized a world around what is an issue that should never have gotten to where it is, but, lays bare, unfortunately, the sins of America. And then probably what we could look back towards is the root of all evils that have come from other places and spread worldwide, which is this supremacist mentality or nationalist mentality or things like that have been pervasive in systems and cultures and things like that, which is an unfortunate dynamic to be in 2020.
It is. You would think we'd have progressed further, but it was very interesting to go around the country and talk with folks in some of the other states, particularly in places like North Dakota, Alaska, Hawaii, being in some of our southwestern states. Growing up in Florida, I was much more familiar with the Hispanic and Black cultures, to the point where I didn't realize that there were these differences when I went to college until I was faced with it directly and went, wait, what? What is happening? Because I mean, everybody, the only difference that mattered to us when we were younger was how much sunscreen you used. And I was on the losing end of that discussion. But when I got to the Northeast, and I can only, well, I would say first shocked, because I thought this can't be real. And then appalled when I realized, oh, this isn't like a single person. This is happening over and over again. But then to go in places where our Native Americans have been pressed out,
Right.
and some of the spaces where the tribes in Alaska are affected, I can't help but also feel for them, because as we think about America and the greatness of coming in and taking over this country, what we're really saying is we came in and took over people, and we obliterated a lot of people. And so I'm curious, because I know right now we are all trying to support the Black community. There's a huge message there. Do you think there is thought, though, of the other minority groups that are also affected maybe differently? But like you said,
Well,
conceptually.
I think historically, what should be kept in perspective is when the Black movement happens, we are standing for every oppressed person. There is when Black people stand up, we're not standing for ourselves. I mean, we're standing for ourselves, but not only for ourselves. We're standing for the oppression of all people of color, ultimately, and even to the benefit of Jewish people who've benefited from civil rights movements, which is why they stood shoulder to shoulder with us in the movement for civil rights, as lawyers, as volunteers, that movement, because in those early days, in those times, you know, Jewish people were being discriminated against just as much, or in different ways. But, you know, these initiatives, these causes that we're fighting for, if we can heal the country for the issues that are very visible for us, as a result, it benefits the rest of the country. It benefits other people who are oppressed. And think about the women's movement to vote. You know, those kind of things came from this ask to be considered to be equal, and to see that these voices were being raised to say we deserve equality, we deserve to be seen, and other people said, yeah, that's a good idea. Now, when it came to all of us, didn't happen at the same time. But yes, the movement is conscious of all oppressed people, and sometimes saddened when all people may be trying to stand on the line so that they don't appear in the same visibility that Black people appear. But, you know, Indian people would not be in this country had it not been for the movements of Black people. You know, Asian people obviously went into intern in encampments, and you know, on some level probably try to keep a low profile, but quietly go, I hope they get this, because you know, these are problems and issues that affect us in different ways. But, you know, there's a lot of ethnic, cultural differences, absolutely. But when we're talking about rights, civil rights, constitutional rights, when we all are seen as equal, then we all benefit from that movement, right? To consider even the LGBTQ plus community would not have many of the benefits that are afforded in the view of equality had it not been for civil rights movements.
Yeah, I think the interesting point you made early on, because I'll go through two of them, is healing. As they've been really trying to think, because my mind goes to, okay, yep, no, it's a problem, buy in 100%. Now the next question is, how do we address it? And one of the things that I did, besides interview people, was I went to a lot of museums, and I walked through, and in the museums that talk about oppression around the country, they have a lot of videos and readings by people who had written during that time. And you can almost soak up the feeling. I mean, you would never be able to fully put yourself in their shoes, but you can at least get as close as might be possible today. And it's extremely moving. And the thing that I took from it is almost what I would call historical trauma. It's like you come into this world as a young person being told, be on alert. And we know from a neurological perspective that actually changes and affects the brain chemistry when we're worried about what's happening around us. And if we don't heal that, then it continues. And I'm curious if people are talking about how that healing might happen, because I think it's going to have to be great.
Well, but you're asking about healing an open wound that continues to have cuts made to it and salt poured in it.
Fair point.
When I reflect on the time that, and I shared that in the video that I posted on Facebook, but the gentleman that I had gone on a date with was top of our class, beautiful Black young man, top of the class, out on a romantic opportunity to, get to know a young lady, and is humiliated in front of her by a police who suspected this top performer, this brilliant mind, beautiful young person, good spirit, dressed in a suit and dress shoes, suspected of being a common criminal running through a park, even though we're sitting in a car. In that moment, consider the damage done to him, not only from the perspective that you have now taken somebody who's growing into his manhood and stripped him of his power on some level. You've disrespected him as a human, and you've humiliated him in front of a Black woman. His first experience, right? And so from here on out, he's got that baggage of an experience of trauma. And that may not be his last experience. I can say that wasn't my last experience. So there is no point to heal, because when the next Black man is pulled over and not given an explanation as to why they've stopped him, when the next Black person is killed or assaulted or harassed, or all of these keep those wounds open. They keep them open for all of us who have ever experienced it. To watch, there was a movie that came out on Netflix, this kind of Bonnie and Clyde experience, Queen Slim, which is a Black couple, and I cried through that movie. And I cried for the Bonnie and Clyde because that experience is real. The fact that, this young man who had not done anything, didn't understand why he's getting pulled over, in a split second, everything changed. His life was being threatened, and had to make, some split decisions to try to save his life, the young lady's life who's with, and she's a lawyer. So in a minute, everything changed for them, and they became outlaws, running, just trying to survive as Black people in America, only to be gunned down at the end in front of a plane that was intended to take them, to another country so that it can at least try to survive. And people would say, well, you're siding with the bad people in the story, but they were not. To me, I could see exactly what happened, and I was rooting for them, and I was rooting for every step of the way that they would, be, saved and get out of this unscathed. But that is what's happening in America. We look around, and we are hoping and praying that every Black person makes it out unscathed. And for the few that have never had the experience, that is a blessing. But there's so few that have never had that experience that it really amplifies the fact that America has a problem, and America has to fix itself first before you can ask the victims to be healed, right? America has got to do right. They've got to do better, and they have to do differently, because it's not enough to try to say that, well, look, you've gotten the house, you've gotten we pay these athletes this so much money, and they should be happy to be able to have these opportunities and experiences. You can live wherever you want, you can do this and do that. But if you have to live in a space where mentally you've had to partition yourself, you've had to build a skin that is 10 feet deep so that you don't. I've had people sit next to me in a work environment argue about the merits of slavery. And what could I do, right? What could I say?
I'm literally shocked. Really?
That, yes, absolutely. And they were completely fine having a normal conversation as to why it was valuable and why it should be, how to reflect on it and where we would be if we didn't have it and all of this kind of thing. So the reality is, I am one Black person in a sea of white people who, to your point earlier, would have never had to think about anything other than sunscreen for most of their life. And then to be in an environment where all I've had to do is get through these different experiences, from being shut out of a swimming pool because I was Black, because, being called out of my name, or being told a joke that suggests that, you can run over us because our lives, are insignificant. So you take all of these community experiences, you put us into environments where we have no protection, because we're one of many. And most of these people have never had to have dinner with somebody different than themselves. No, they haven't had any real interactions to know culturally the differences they see. In that time, it may have been MTV or, some musical aspect, sports aspects of how they see our community. And then the news and the negative aspects of how they may have seen the community. But they're having superficial conversations without any relative experiential relationship to what that means for a Black woman sitting next to them hearing this conversation, but it's,
that's grotesque. That conversation shouldn't be happening regardless, but then it is incredibly impressively insensitive under the I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, but
obviously we've come as a country, that conversation was taking place in maybe the early 2000s, late 90s. It's 2020. So the assumption is, and hope is that, that conversation, people are a little more woke these days, a little bit more sensitive to these days. But, we're talking about compounded,
right,
impacts of life experiences that get us to who we are and where we are at the end of the day. The fact that my ancestors, my mother's grandfather was born into slavery. The fact that, these Jim Crow laws and the issues that we've faced as a people, these aren't some, forever gone experiences. These are things relevant to generations that we've been able to touch. And to try to rise above it. Many of us were brainwashed into thinking that once we got the degree, as long as we dress a certain way and talk a certain way and do all of these things, that somehow we would be protected from this this stereotype of being Black. But at the core is that there is just an innate hatred towards Black people by some group of people in this country. But as a culture and as a country, our ethnic culture is loved, right? The music, the style of dress, the way we walk, the swag, the lips, the, all of these things that people, want, that they value, that they enjoy, that, we're entertaining on the football fields. And when we sing Tina Turner, oh my goodness, but when it comes to caring about our healthcare impacts to disadvantaged communities, to fair wages, livable wages for a number of people that are in frontline positions, for the fact that I work in a company that's over 30,000 employees, and there's not one Black face that I can point out in an executive leadership role. These are the realities of our experiences, and America has not addressed those issues that continue to affect Black communities. And when Black communities are trying to stand together to say, these are the things that we need attention on, there's never enough money. There's other priorities. There's this is a one-off to get a vote. There are all of these reasons that that the greater populace doesn't see value in investing to solve these issues. But they can build another sports complex that's worth multi-millions or billions, that'll generate, crazy money. They can invest, obviously, in things that send us to war, and they're willing to take those aspects. There's so many things that we know that they have money to support, but the priority is not given to the communities in need, to include Native Americans, when we look at how impacted those communities are. But when people stop seeing the value in the humanity of these root cause issues, we have the systemic ongoing impacts that have been built into these systems that continue to cycle through the oppression. And even when we've tried as a people, the Black Wall Street, all of these places that we've had our own wealth, even here in Florida in Ocoee, they slaughtered entire Black communities of wealth because they were envious of how successful they were, that they had their own land, and with the intention to steal the land from them so that they couldn't be here, right? And then they'll turn around and tell us, you got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. When we had these communities that were thriving, that were trying to be able to facilitate the betterment of the Black community. So at the end of the day, the Black community is not saying, hey, we want to live separate. We're not saying we want revenge for all of the horrible things. We're saying we want to be seen, and we want to be equal, and we want to be valued. And we want to ensure that we have a voice for people in our communities to address all of these issues that continue to directly impact our ability to thrive as an ethnic culture within America.
Think you nailed it, right? And apologies if I suggest that healing should come from only within. That really was intended to say, how do we as an entire nation recognize, lift up, be part of a forward movement, rather than to suggest, hey, it's time, you guys. That would never be my position, obviously. Right. I definitely am trying to ask the question of how do we help? How do we listen? So many of us are sensitive to the fact that we have not lived the experiences that you have, and they are real. They are serious. You're absolutely right. The compounding, again, I can't speak from a firsthand experience of that, but I can speak from an observation of it. And I can speak from a recognition of what that does to the mind, and what that does to the nerves, and how much that trauma really does take a toll. It makes people tired. It makes people burn out and reasonably pissed off at some point. I don't know if people can imagine constantly having to watch out for your kids. I have a number of girlfriends whose sons are Black, and they're in elementary age groups right now, but they are nervous as heck. One is in Minneapolis. So, she's just beside herself saying, this isn't entirely a culture I know or that I grew up with, but this is my reality with my child. And I'm, mama bears are coming out right and left saying,
Right.
how do we make sure that we do better? And one of the things that you touched on was the systemic piece. Very hard to change when we get into where money is allocated. I can speak for this one firsthand, getting into the government space and recognizing how money moves on budget lines, how Congress is involved, how things are controlled by those in power. And there's a huge push to maintain that power, no matter
Right.
who is in the way. And they will use whatever means is available to maintain the money moving in a direction that is favorable to them personally. And I don't mean to sound like conspiracy theory, but it is very real, and you
Oh,
can
yeah.
chart it and you can map it. And it's shocking how complex and how truly awful it really is. So undoing that is equally as chaotic, complex, and challenging.
Yeah.
And it's not based on doing the right thing. It's about doing the thing that benefits a small group of people the most.
Absolutely.
So I'm curious, are there conversations being had about how we change that? I know in the military, there's a lot about, diversity is beneficial, right? We know that if we have one female on a team, the decision making improves something like 60% of the time. Like there's the average decision quality improves substantially when we have people with different backgrounds, belief systems, and capabilities and skills. It just changes the way that we can interact overseas, the way that we can hopefully find peaceful solutions a lot of times where it's misunderstandings versus necessarily the need for combat. And so who was it from the Air Force? Lieutenant General Silveri, he said, diversity is a force multiplier.
Yeah.
And so it's not just, in my mind, absolutely there's a humanitarian piece about it. There's the right thing to do. There's loving the brothers and sisters across our country of all different colors. But there's also just a reality. We all benefit. We have the best talent stepping up and doing the things that they do best. And when we knock anyone down, we not only detract from their health, well-being, capability, and strength, we also harm ourselves. And I don't know if people are understanding that we're cutting off our nose to spite our face here too. There's the benefit of this country is creativity and diversity, and yet we're spending an inordinate amount of time shutting that down.
Well, the interesting thing is that the military got this a lot sooner than corporate America got it, and a lot sooner than general America got it, right? I remember leading conversations, training in the military about inclusion and bias and stereotypes. Now, that said, there are still people that are in those training sessions going, I'm not doing this. I'm not listening. I don't think women should be here. I don't think minorities should be here. But the government said this is important because we've got to trust each other, one, right? We've got to be able to work together, and we've got to be successful at our missions. And that means that we've all got to be moving in the same direction here. Now, corporate America has been doing this. They've ebbed and flowed though, right? Corporate America valued in diversity and inclusion, used to have CIOs for, CDOs and all the chief diversity officers. And then they got rid of all of that because they said, we created diversity because we hired some Russians and some Czechs and some, somebody from over here and from over there, so they said, we're no longer going to define it as, African Americans or necessarily Latinos or things like related to necessarily diversity of American minority groups. They've categorized it now as diversity of people from around the world, so they can have a high number of Indians possibly and feel like they've gotten the diversity quotient, and then the rest of American citizens who've been oppressed for so long are still not making any ground in a lot of corporations because of that. Now, we've seen the Black Lives Matter movement take hold around the world. And I have been shocked initially and then moved to see my white CEO take the time to pen a letter to essentially Black employees, but all employees, to say, this is important and we have to stand behind this, and we need to all be courageous leaders, transformative leaders, leading change both in our organization and in our communities. And I was like, thank you, Jesus. Because I've never seen that. I've never seen that from a corporate perspective. Definitely.
You don't make me cry.
I cried.
I
posted a note to my leadership and said, I'm in tears.
Yeah.
Because I have never seen that. And to see more and more corporation CEOs taking this bold, courageous leadership position to say, we're going to come down on the right side of history here and make a proactive effort of how we can affect change around committing to say Black Lives Matter, is just wonderful, because the NFL had this opportunity 5 years ago. Yeah. They had the opportunity to lead change, to be transformative, to take all of the power that they have, all of the money, and the majority voices. There's no other industry in America that has that percent concentration of Black employees, essentially, right? With that much power. And they had an opportunity and they squandered it. And not only did they squander it, they shoved a knife in it, when they pulled Colin Kaepernick and blackballed him. And, all of Black America said, well, then we're not going to any more NFL games. And the NFL said, we don't care because you guys aren't important to us at the end of the day. So here 5 years later, to see the NFL miss the mark, but now all these companies around the country are standing up in solidarity with this movement. And our CEOs even committing to reinstitute a chief diversity officer, has stated he's going to form an advisory panel to get perspectives from people of color into the conversation, because we're not in the room.
Yes, it's been my preaching point all along, is that you have to know game rules, which are not get good grades, go to college, apply for a job. That is not the way power works. I had to learn that as well, because I didn't grow up in that. And you have to be in the room. Number one scenario, if you're not in the room, unfortunately, you end up without a real vote. And so I agree, you have to have someone that invites you in. At that point, you can start to make change. But closed doors, I think, is one of those number one systemic issues that causes problems. And it's not, in that case, it's power versus typically low income or lower power. It affects, I think, the Black community more than others, but there are many that are affected by that.
Yeah, well, and then when we talk about systemic racism, we're talking about a bias that has been just built in, and it's not even intentional bias in some cases. So if we look at my company, for example, the bias is that the people making the decisions are choosing people that they're having experiences with, and by default, they're not having those experiences with people of color. Right. Because one, we haven't made it to the level within the organization to be in front of them, and they're not proactively reaching out. So, these kind of things create a bias dynamic within the organization that has limited the number of people of color in key positions, which impacts their financial position within the community, right? You don't have as much money as the next guy. And so then you translate that, though, in the criminal justice law enforcement environment, which is where our focus is right now, and the issues and concerns is this goes beyond police. We're not just talking about the police out on the beat. We're talking about their supervisor. We're talking about the coroner who keeps manipulating information to favor the police department. We're talking about prosecutors who don't want to piss off the police that they have to work with all the time on all of these other issues. And we're talking about judges who have an implicit bias because they don't see Black people as having the same potential or the same natural good disposition as they might see when they look at a white person. And so they're sentencing different. They're dismissing different. And then when you talk about juries, I haven't been called for jury duty once, ever. And I don't know hardly anybody in the Black community of my circle of friends, educated doctors, lawyers, and otherwise, that have ever been called for jury duty. And when you actually look into it, you find out that they're intentionally not calling Black people as a majority for jury duty, especially not educated, capable, well-versed constitutionally Black people, because it changes the whole dynamic.
Yeah, depends on who the lawyer is that's trying to figure out who they want on the jury. That can be extremely biased. Yeah.
Right. Now you look at the statistics, and if you're in a majority Black community, that's a whole different ballgame. Yeah. But those are so few. Those pockets, when you think about the entire continental United States, the majority of every place that we're seeing issues happen with police brutality and murders and all of those things related to the Black community from a criminalization standpoint, we're talking places that the majority rules. And so, this system that is arresting people for marijuana, or arresting people for a counterfeit $20 bill that they may not have even known was counterfeit. These are the kind of low-level crimes that nobody should be going to jail for, let alone prison, because they can't afford bail. And then now you've created a system where they have a criminal record, which impacts their ability to get jobs, that impacts all of the things that come down from that as a result of the impact to the community, impact to their families, and all of these things. So all of this is problematic. And when we talk about how to solve and how to attack this, what things do you focus on or whatnot? I mean, in this moment, the framework here is you need to look at the budgets of the police departments. You need to reprioritize where that money is focused and the type of training. I believe that police should have a higher level of education and a longer period of training that is more intensive, that is more focused on de-escalation and community relations. I believe that prosecutors should not be involved when a police shooting occurs. I believe that the FBI should go immediately to a federal external agency for review. And I don't believe that local judges should be involved. Once it turns federal, it goes to a federal judge who would not have regular interactions with that prosecutor, who would not have regular interactions with that police department. And therefore, you keep the corruption out. Now, you start talking about the police unions. That, to me, is a whole other issue. With the level of power they've been given, that power has got to be stripped, because right now they are far too influential in the decision-making process around good and bad cops and how to go about that. We should never have had a cop that had 17 prior complaints training anybody, right? That's just unacceptable. I mean, I believe in a 3-strike rule, pay for performance. All of these things need to be instituted immediately to affect change, because as soon as people start being held accountable and you start removing the power that these different levels have within the process, you immediately shift how people go out into the world. You've got all these cops resigning because they don't want to, respect this, kill first, ask questions later policy. So my thought is, go ahead, resign. Let's start over and reimagine how we do law enforcement, because there are countries around the world that do it vastly different, and they're successful, and they have low number of deaths per year. We are a large country. We've got problems, but there has got to be a better way to do it. We know there is because we've seen it in other places. We know it is because
Oh,
other
yeah.
cities in our own country have instituted these things. It's time for us as a community, as a country, to be transformational leaders and thought provokers, to say we have an opportunity here to reimagine this whole thing. Let's stop being stuck in the way that it's always been, and leading by fear of what could happen if it doesn't look like this. Let's explore the possibilities of what could happen if we change the whole thing.
I love it. I love it. I'd like to end with, what could the everyday citizen do? Because you and me, we think on that level of, okay, this is corruption at these 15 layers. I'm 100% there. But somebody who can't get into government, or who, holds a sign but doesn't actually see the impact, or tries to vote when they have two bad choices, or, people are feeling, I think there's a lot of people interested in listening right now and are willing to do something, but I'm not sure everyone knows what to do. I love the story about your CEO, because that was something within their control to step up and take action, and not just write a letter, but actually say, we're going to make two key decisions right away that are going to lead to more positive decisions. That's a great example. But again, not everybody has that power either. So how does somebody make a different decision, or be more sensitive, or protect, or think, or, just, yeah. You see where I'm going? Something
Absolutely.
smaller and tangible that we can all do to tip the scales, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like we need multiple layers, but one of them is simply to have a mindset shift.
Yeah. So first, allyship is invaluable because minority voices and minority votes are the minority for a reason. The majority has the power, and the majority in today's party system is white women and white men, but white women alone on the Democratic and Independent front have the numbers to affect significant change. So if white women stand with minority communities and help amplify the voices and amplify the needs of those communities, we can affect change. And that voice comes with the vote. It comes with letters to our legislator. It comes by listening to the needs of the community and not being apathetic and saying that doesn't affect me, so I don't have a stake in it, right? We need people to understand that if communities of color are impacted, it affects all of us. I don't live in the hood, but that does not matter.
A beautiful house.
These issues affect my people. They affect my brothers and sisters in the native populations. And I consider Mexicans native because they were pushed out of this country. So these are, people who need amplification of voices to listen, because first you must listen to understand, and then you must understand so that you can grow. And then when you grow, you have limbs that are strong enough to hold others up. And that's what we need people to get, and we need people to do. And right now is the time to be out there making sure that you're understanding where the votes need to go. Obviously, I'm going to say vote down the Democratic ticket, but I'm going to add on to that the people that affect change in policing are going to be our state attorneys. Those are going to be a part of the puzzle there. Right. So know who you're voting for, know what their policy is, where they're going to stand on these issues. Do they get it? And are they too in bed with the prosecutors or the police or the judges to the extent that they're not going to stand up to do the right thing that needs to get done? Understand the needs of these different communities and how you can have an impact, whether it is, it's not going to be about trying to register Black people to vote. I went around and canvassed And at the time that I had canvassed, all the Black people had already voted. Black folks that are registered to vote are going to vote, and that is not the concern. I saw in the 2016 election, the problem was that there were too many white people who said, I just don't like that candidate, and did not show up to vote. And it cost us all of these other, down the line issues that impacted everybody. And so we need people to just stand up, even when it's difficult, even when it doesn't fit your wheelhouse, to just stand up and stand in the space and stand in the gap and feel the need to raise the consciousness and support forward movement of this country so that we can get to a better day in a better way.
I love it. Nila, you are always amazing, and I always learn so much. Thank you so much for joining us. This is The Nerdy Truth, and I'm your host, Dr. JJ Walcott.